G'day and welcome to the Off-Chain Podcast. Don here with you. Our guest today is Andrew Forson, Head of Ventures at the Hashgraph Association, or THA. THA is driving Hedera-powered solutions through its network of partnerships and is shortly launching a $100 million Web3 Venture Fund in Abu Dhabi to drive tech innovations in Africa and in the Middle East. We're really excited to discuss the OG that is Hedera, how their partnerships are bringing network adoption and much more. Let's dive in. Tell us about your origin story. How did you get started in Web3?
Wow. Well, I probably have one of the least interesting origin stories because I started in the world of traditional finance. My background is in financial and risk engineering. Started my career with Deloitte Consulting, worked with their valuation at the time, the value-based management practice out of Toronto. And then eventually I felt that I needed more in-depth knowledge on finance, basically how financial instruments are priced and created. So went on and did courses in financial and risk engineering in Washington, D.C. And then I started a software company building financial risk management software. I sort of came from that generation where we started programming like at the age of 7. Just like with the first Apple or IBM clone computers. So you just sort of grow up developing software. And that continued, that intersection of finance and software has carried through my entire career trajectory. In the late teens, so around 2017, 2018, I started to get really interested in this whole blockchain DLT stuff. What is it all about? How can it be used? And the promise of it could bring to payments, in particular, cross-border payments, transnational payments. Yeah. And it was just interesting because if you travel the world, you realize that, coming from Canada, being raised in Montreal, born and raised in Montreal, everything works quite efficiently. But my heritage, my parents were born and raised in Ghana, West Africa. And so we'd often visit. And systems were different. But one of the things that you would notice the most is how money moved would be very electronic in the West, back home in Canada, but it'd be very cash-based in Ghana. Mm-hmm. But then, as more of the diaspora would live overseas, like my parents, they would have to send money back to Ghana. And sending money to these countries to care for relatives or whatnot was always a challenge. It's always slow. It was always expensive. Like wire transfer fees, expensive. Western Union, expensive. Would require multiple steps. And as you realized back then that cryptocurrencies were sort of like a form of money, a novel form of money that were readily transferable from point to point, and it'd be quite fast. That became very interesting. What could you do with that? How could you build applications around that? How could you embed this technology in applications that you use now? And really, that's how things started. So you start testing, then you see if you could make something real, but it doesn't work or nobody would know how to use it because there are wallets and keys that get lost. But I always approach this particular field from the perspective of building applications more so than from the perspective of speculating and tokens for investing. Maybe that was dumb. Maybe if I'd done more of that, I'd be better off. But ultimately, it gave me a real appreciation for the power of the technology to solve real life problems and business problems, and the fact that it can solve these things in a global way, independent of a central host. So this is how my career progression merged with the whole Web3 ecosystem that exists today. Yeah.
So even though you had a finance background, really you came into it trying to build or solve problems, and not, like you said, just seeing the investment. 2017 was pretty nuts in terms of investing. There's a lot of money in ICOs and it was pre-NFTs, but Yeah, man, there's a lot of money being thrown around and a lot of money being made and lost. But did you just see through that, or that didn't interest you, or you just saw the opportunity elsewhere?
Well, I think much like today, it's sort of weird because what happens is you want to understand, well, why is it valuable? Right? Like, because it goes up really, really high, then there's a rug pull. They didn't use that term then. I think it was sort of pump and dump or something like that. But, an asset would go up really, really high, then it would plummet. And that was it. You'd want to figure out, well, why? What is the intrinsic value behind it? How does it work? And how can it be used? And what would happen is, of course, you would acquire tokens and be able to participate in that space. But ultimately, you would try to embed the technology into an application and see if you can make things cool work. From the perspective of finance and digital assets, over time, you realize that the ability to leverage DLT as a single source of truth for either data or almost like a pre-audited ledger, because you know that when something is printed to the DLT, it can't readily be changed, right? It requires significant effort if the blockchain is working right to change it. So that gets very, very interesting.
Yeah, man. Well, so how did you then end up, or should I say, why Hedera and Hashgraph Association for you then?
Actually, I did have experience working, well, it's not as much of an ecosystem, but Hyperledger in the corporate space, then Ripple, Ethereum, and Cardano. But I ended up working with Hedera because I was actually very intrigued by the fixed to the US dollar gas fee.
Oh, yeah?
Because, yeah, I know it sounds ridiculous, but remember, as a finance nerd or wonk, it is very difficult to be able to price an asset out in the long term if the cost associated with building that asset or transferring that asset can swing wildly, right? Yeah. Because we don't like to go to a shop and one day the price of eggs is, I don't know, $1 an egg, and the next day it's $12 an egg. It's hard to budget because people's incomes tend to be relatively stable. And I think one of the things that Hedera did very, very well was it was easy to program with. And this was more in the 2020s. I heard of Hedera earlier, but prior to that, I'd been sort of tinkering with the more traditional chains. But in the early 2020s, it was the idea of the fixed fee, the high transaction speed capacity, the Java basis of the programming environment. It meant that you didn't have to learn an entirely new or arcane language to build with it. And the fact that it seemed very, very light. And this is after working with a bunch of other, wonderful ecosystems, wonderful blockchains, but the prospect of building out big applications on them was never there. I'm not going to lie. The existence of a governing council also made it seem that it was the heir apparent to Hyperledger in the enterprise space, right?
Gotcha.
So you have a lot of Fortune 500 class, world-class companies and educational institutions that sit on the governing board of the DLT. It makes it much easier to try to build out applications on the platform. And one of the first applications that we worked on that was deployed, and this was done with the support of the foundation, actually prior to my being employed within the ecosystem, was building an enterprise workflow management tool that would actually track transactions, messages, and activities on-chain on Hedera. and trying to make that process very, very easy. And it's actually interesting. The more you work with Hedera, the less likely you feel the need to work with other chains, because they've made the developer experience very, very seamless. And the reality is, I think if you look at the internet or even mobile phones, adoption increased whenever people made it easy to do stuff, right? Like there was a time when to use a computer, you had to be skilled at the MS-DOS command prompt. If you wanted to get a list of your directories, it's like, you'd have to give a dir and star and use wildcards. Then Windows came along and made it easier. Apple came along and made the mobile phone easier, more accessible. And this is something that I actually think Hedera did do very, very well. They made it easier to understand and easier to price and budget. Because if you're a traditional business person or a traditional application developer, imagine having to struggle with the whole idea that your data doesn't necessarily reside in one central place anymore and is eternally public. But on top of that, you got to figure out how writing to that data store is going to be financed, because you got to get people to pay every time you want to lodge something to the blockchain. And this is a difference between DLT and standard relational database, where with a relational database, one entity is basically paying for the database, and it's all you can eat for as much as that database server can support. So it's somewhat easier to budget. In this case, every time somebody does something, you got to pay a little bit. But if the price of a token goes from, 1 cent to $1,000, that's great if you're the token holder, because, when, moon, and hodl. But it's not as good if you've built your application to consume that particular token and the gas fees have gone up commensurately. So that stability, in my view, has made Hedera an absolute game changer for anybody seeking to build a Web3 application.
Yeah, man. I remember, again, back in 2017, when everyone thought, man, Ethereum is going to be amazing and you can build things on it and this is wonderful. And then all of a sudden, reality struck when you're trying to make a simple transaction when an ICO is on, or anytime the traffic is busy, people trying to do things all at the same time and congestion and whatnot. Got absolutely nuts and incredibly expensive. How have you found users' response to the uniqueness of Hedera's approach in this regard? Users and builders, how they're responding?
Yeah, actually, they respond very well. And a lot of them, I think your experience is exactly what a lot of people go through. They go out, they build out the solution. And of course, when you're building it, it's on testnet, so it's free. Then when you deploy it, normally you start building when a price is at a certain thing, and it takes a while to build it and get it right. So when you're done, price is a little higher, but you're like, yay, it's working. You deploy it, then you realize, oh crap, the unit economics have changed and they continue to change. And how do I successfully pass on this new marginal cost to my customer without chasing them away? And sadly, we're all entrepreneurs at heart. We're all technologists. We love this stuff. You just want to build stuff and see your thing work and someone else use it the way you envisaged it. But the little finance stuff in the back end, you don't think about it until it's being deployed. And that's what the Hedera piece has done well, because you're able to predict that price point from the time of development through to deployment. And that is incredibly well received, particularly when we're pitching to enterprises, and we're able to literally make a price calculator so they understand that on a per transaction basis, these will be the ranges of your cost. Therefore, you can facilitate providing actual proper pricing.
Yeah, man. So obviously Hedera has been able to carve out its place in the Web3 or crypto or blockchain ecosystem. What do you say to people who might suggest that, we've built enough infrastructure, we've got enough L1s, everyone stop building L1s, we need more application layer, or we need to somehow get more users on board. What do you say to people who are like, you have some USP, but why another L1?
I think it's a great question. And now I'm going to sort of carry the hat of the actual ecosystem, like the entire Web3 ecosystem.
Yeah.
I don't see what the harm is in having additional innovation, because ultimately what will happen is there will be a degree of reconciliation and rationalization amongst layer ones.
Yeah.
It is inevitable, because ultimately I believe that the function of layer ones across DLT will be somewhat commoditized. Today, the application we're using to communicate, it has a link that has a unique identifier on it. So there's obviously some sort of database activity happening in the back end of whatever the application we're using is. And that database is likely a relational database. And between you and I don't think we know if it's MS SQL, if it's MariaDB, if it's Oracle, but it works. And I think to some extent that will show the success of the industry. I mean, right now, Oracle is one of the most valuable corporations in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no harm in having multiple L1s. Ultimately, it will be the features and function set that determines which ones are the winners. And there will always be room for niche L1s for particular purposes that people will enjoy using. And I think the more the merrier, and let the market decide. That's how I feel.
Yeah. Also, okay. So at the same time, you're saying the more the merrier, but you're also anticipating some consolidation. You think that consolidation will just happen in waves? So now a wave of innovation and explosion of new layers, and then consolidation and another maybe wave? Or do you think this is the year where actually we get the consolidation and we start to kind of really indent some grooves that have more permanency?
Yeah, I actually think it will happen in waves. And I think the reason why it will happen in waves is there are technologies out there that will consume DLT blockchain in ways we never envisaged 5 years ago. Let's look at the boom in AI, right? Now, AI is effectively all the rage right now. But at some point, people are going to have to start to record the provenance of data in a way that they're able to trace whether this particular learning model has been trained on original source data, or is it basically a photocopy of a photocopy
Nice.
of basically rehashed AI-generated data. That is inevitable, because we are going to want to know, well, is this stuff true? Maybe not the average consumer, but if you think about scientific research, or if you think about quantitative data that is used to test the strength of steel in the design of an airline, you're going to want to know that the figures and formula that you're dealing with are actually generated by academics based on their real tests, as opposed to something that has been, cobbled together by a range of large language learning models, right? So
Or
that is something,
a copy of a hallucination. Yeah.
well, that would be terrible. Like, imagine that it's decided to eliminate certain data points because of eliminations, and it's just magically decided to round out a certain figure in an equation that requires a degree of precision.
Yeah.
Right? So I think these sort of specialist chains, subchains, and associated chains, side chains, private chains, these things are going to continue to be needed. Also, there's going to be requirements at national levels to have chains that are not entirely public. There's going to have to be a degree of private chains for data that is considered national security type, but access will still be needed throughout a particular country or region or within a company. So I just think that the consolidation and innovation will continue to happen.
Yeah, man, that's cool. Is there anything in particular about artificial intelligence that you're looking forward to, in particular at the intersection of Web3 or DLT?
Yeah, I think an area I'm really interested in is the integration of AI and investing whenever it comes to digital assets and real world assets.
Mhm.
Because I think more so than everybody thinks, oh, AI, will you be able to predict? Prediction is one thing, but what about being able to better select a set of investments out of a pool of global investments to give you a particular yield whenever you don't necessarily have the ability to always be online searching to select? Let me give you a case in point. If I have a particular yield and risk profile or appetite, and I say, look, my goal is to earn 7.2%. I would like this to be in something associated with fixed income, and I would like that to be for a period of 7 years, right? So maybe today, whenever I pick that investment, there is a tokenized bond in the US that is paying out that particular profile. But something happens in the US and perhaps the bond yield changes, and I'm not necessarily following that directly. But maybe there's elsewhere in a country, elsewhere in the world, maybe it's a multilateral development bank like the World Bank with a similar credit rating that is not generally in my profile because I'm not watching international news or I don't have access to these particular channels. But if my system knows what the profile is, it could be on an automated basis seeking that exact investment profile and making the automated changes needed for me to maintain that profile across a global set of instruments. That requires a degree of intelligence and integration with digital assets. And that would be done that is possible. It is possible to do this far more efficiently now in the day and age of digital assets where transactions are faster and the transaction costs are less than if you had to open a brokerage account in the US and then sell out of the position, open one in Hong Kong, maybe invest via an ADR. Oh, that investment doesn't work. So what do? I have to maybe find somebody or a brokerage firm to invest on my behalf. So this sort of automation will allow us to pick our return profiles instead of us having to only choose from a given set.
Yeah, that's cool. I can imagine, obviously, agents being a part of that and going out looking for those particular things that fit your investment thesis, or maybe your investment thesis, but not your investment focus, maybe like you were saying. That's really interesting, actually. And the fact that these are global markets 24/7, there's no downtime, there's always opportunity. That is really exciting.
And of course, that same idea, you can get more aggressive, right? I gave a very conservative profile just to demonstrate the ability to have the same risk profile across different markets, but have it managed automatically. So you don't have to worry about, oh man, I better sell or time the market, or do I need to look to an emerging markets fund? But imagine you are able to see some seasonalities. You can ask, well, at a particular time of year, I want to make sure I'm getting a yield that exceeds the S&P 500 index or equivalent throughout the world. Just find it. Or I don't want to get, and the system says, okay, well, I'm looking across all these digital assets, and I'm also looking across a whole bunch of asset classes, equities, debts, tokens, because tokens are indeed a new asset class to make this happen in an automated way. I think that with that, the sky is the limit. It really gives rise to wonderful opportunities for people to make wealth. The other thing that I would say is the fact that traditionally in the global south, to use a traditional term, the third world, it's very hard for people to invest. I'm not sure when people talk about, blockchain, do you mean Bitcoin? Well, one of the killer apps in the blockchain space is actually that of stablecoins.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to think of it in a lot of countries that suffer from incredibly high inflation rates. the ability to access USDC or USDT is the difference between losing your money or having your money decay at a rate of 30% a quarter. Now, imagine what that means. That means if you have $100 today and you want to just keep your $100, right? If I have $100 January 1st and I want to ensure that come April 1st, I also have the equivalent $100 US dollars of buying power, but I'm in a place that has that 30%, 33% per quarter inflation rate, that means I basically have to make that return on my business. I've got to make $133. I have to make that extra $33 in that quarter just to stay even. Now, if you were to ask the best investment manager, are you able to generate a return of 20, 25, 30% per quarter in order to just meet your hurdle rate? They'd say, no, man, you're out of your mind. I mean, last year, the S&P 500 returned 25% on the year, which was considered a good year.
Great.
Now, imagine, if you have that degree of inflation, and some countries do, how hard is it for you to get ahead? And this is where stablecoins and digital assets are game changers, because that same person can literally hold their wealth in USDC, and that decay will be considerably less, right? And it's just a matter of having a wallet on their phone and having an on and off ramp for being able to convert that to their local currency when they need to. This is a game changer. And that is only made possible because of blockchain.
Yeah, man. And then not only the inflationary hedge of stablecoins, but then being able to put those stablecoins to work and actually getting a return. Even like you were saying before, also you can have different agents across your portfolio with different risk profiles. For that person in the global south, like you mentioned, not just struggling to maintain their family wealth, but to actually have access to significantly growing it would be unbelievable.
Absolutely. And right there, we just talked about wealth preservation. But now, I'm not sure if you recall, back in the day, the whole concept of helping poor people in the global south move ahead was the idea of giving microloans.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was young, I used to think, man, and God bless the people who work in this field. I want to preface my next statements with the fact that I am not a microloan expert. I am certainly not a development economics or development finance expert. But I used to think, I was 8 or 9 or 10, and I'd think, and that's so dumb. I was like, why would your solution to giving somebody who has nothing be to put them effectively into debt, right?
Sure.
And I realize there are different means of doing it, and sometimes they'd forgive the debt and whatnot. But my thinking was you'd almost be better off giving people a certain amount that could be invested at birth or whatnot, and you let them enjoy the proceeds of that tiny investment over an extended period of time. Well, now it is possible for more people around the world to invest in more assets situated outside of their countries. I mean, traditionally, you could only effectively invest in assets that were approved and available within your country's borders.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were somebody in Sierra Leone, you would have a very hard time going out and buying Microsoft shares. It would require a special type of account, right? Now, I foresee a future where kids in school will be able to go to their phones, access a wallet, and buy a portion of a tokenized share. Because the nice thing about tokens is it's able to fractionalize down to sometimes 18 decimal points. Whereas with certain bonds, for instance, the face value, the minimum amount that you could buy is $1,000. Sometimes it's $100,000. But with tokenized instruments, you could buy a tenth, a thousandth of a Bitcoin if you need to, and be in the game, right? So in this way, we're opening up the ability for large swaths of people to be able to invest. And I think that is absolutely ground changing.
Yeah, man. Yeah, definitely. Revolutionary for people.
100%.
Yeah, man. You mentioned, not being a development expert as such, but I understand THA partnered with Deloitte to develop enhanced corporate ESG impact verification on chain.
We did.
How are you thinking about using ESG as a force for good in maybe a time when that's kind of slipping off of the agenda of many companies and projects?
Well, I think actually that's a great question. But from the perspective of this project, it wasn't looked at in a trendy way. It was looked at in a way of capturing value. So, and being able to make it to capture value associated with green initiatives, carbon sequestration in an economic, fast, ready, and easy to understand manner. In the case of the Deloitte project, we worked extensively with the Deloitte office out of the Netherlands, and they worked on a mangrove project in the Dutch Caribbean. And basically, these mangroves were used as natural forms to sequester carbon. Mm-hmm. And the idea is to track that so that you could eventually generate carbon credits in a very transparent, you'd want the you'd want the process. I don't understand methodology. Yeah, you'd want the methodology to be absolutely transparent to the purchasers of these eventual credits. Yep. But the idea is because they've proven this model and they've developed the technology to capture the relevant digital measurement, recording, and verification information on chain, what it means is it can be reproduced not just for mangroves, but for forests, for any type of product that requires tracking of natural goods, natural byproducts that can be used to reduce carbon or otherwise. Now, at this point, because you have a system that could be run efficiently, then it's a matter of what the implementation cost is, because once it's implemented, it almost exists in perpetuity. So even if ESG all of a sudden totally goes out of fashion and the cost of or price of carbon credit, the carbon credit markets really decline for a period of time, which may well happen, there's still value being created. I mean, with a lot of commodities, the margins associated with commodity trading is not the highest. As a matter of fact, if you look at foreign currency trading, like the markets for currency trading are the most liquid, biggest in the world that run for 24 hours. But the margins in the most liquid instruments, like I bet you if you were to take maybe USD euro, are probably very, very small. And yet there are many foreign currency traders. Why? Because there's availability and they're able to work the system to create profit even though the margins are small. So just because the margins are reducing, our cost of actually recording and generating these credits are also going down. And with the system that has been created in partnership with Deloitte, we've almost created a way of commoditizing this so that once it's implemented, these things are generated in perpetuity in a more or less automated way so it can be sold. So the prices will indeed go up and down, just like currency exchange prices, but the value, there will always likely be some value for this sort of thing as long as humans continue to sadly pollute.
Man, that's really cool. But are there any other?
I think that project, yeah.
I'm wondering, that it takes a little orthogonal thinking. Are there other kinds of endeavors like that in terms of capturing value that you've been working on or that you're seeing being built on Hedera?
Yeah. One cool project is actually a project called SealCoin. And I think this is it's Sealcoin AI, and this is a project that THA has done in partnership with a company based out of Geneva, Switzerland called WiseKey. And WiseKey is actually also been responsible for putting Hedera into space. They have a subdivision called WiseSat, and they set out these micro satellites, and they set it up so that the satellites are able to do secure transactions with devices on the ground via the Hedera DLT. But with this Sealcoin project, it's actually pretty innovative, because what they do is they take IoT devices, which normally work within a relatively closed network, but they allow you to recreate these closed networks within their platform. And it's all built on Hedera. So I can take an IoT device in, I don't know, Accra, Ghana, take another one in Tokyo, Japan, take one here in Zurich, Switzerland, and register them on the system. Now, the next thing that I'm able to do is have these devices communicate autonomously with each other, but transact autonomously with each other through the use of the token of this platform. So, for instance, if I have my IoT device here in Zurich, and it needs to buy weather data from this IoT device that is located in Tokyo, the two devices via the Sealcoin platform can transact that data, and my device in Zurich can pay directly to the device in Tokyo for every weather reading that it's taking there at a simple level. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means if we have smart meters, if we have solar panels, I can have a set of solar panels located in Accra, Ghana, and I can actually pay from Zurich and Tokyo for power that is used in Accra, Ghana via this token, all through IoT devices. So the next generation is effectively this concept of transactional IoT, where you can pay for data or services, but you don't have to interact or do it directly. Your devices are able to do so via the platform, right? So it sort of makes the world your network, but instead of it being our network, the world becomes our devices network.
That's cool. And then they have their own market.
Exactly.
That they autonomously transact. Exactly. That's really cool.
Yeah. And of course, I just tried to keep it. Yeah, I was trying to keep it a little bit simple, but obviously it means buyers of data or services can transact with bulk amounts of IoT devices via the platform to centralize data. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. How do you, I know you spend most of your time thinking venture and investments and things like that. What made THA decide to launch a venture fund as part of your strategy, personally? And then why Abu Dhabi versus some other jurisdiction?
Well, these are great questions. The idea behind having a venture fund is to be able to really leverage traditional capital markets and pools of capital to boost the THA, THG, Hedera ecosystem. So traditionally, when Web3 started, a lot of the layer ones would give money via grants. But what would happen is it's hard to get a return on investments to the chain if you're just giving the money away.
Yeah.
So then the next thing is to say, okay, well, let's use a venture model where we are forced to look more deeply and more holistically into a project because we're taking equity. But when you do that in the form of warehouse deals or directly as a foundation or a foundation type entity, you're providing the financing or as an equity investment, but you're doing this almost alone or solo. The next iteration of that is to say, well, why don't we do this through some sort of collective investment vehicle as a fund, where, of course, we provide seed capital, but now what we want to do is give an opportunity for other expert and strategic investors to put money into that fund too, so we invest together.
Mm-hmm.
As a part of that process, we're now calling on your expertise on your network to work with our technological expertise to make investment decisions and selections. One of the benefits of that is you get the benefit of, I'll call it like a groupthink, multiple minds trying to make the best investment decision. But the other benefit of that is once an investment has been made, follow-on capital is not necessarily reliant just on the ecosystem, but you have the vested interest of other strategic investors coming in together to use their networks to crowd capital in from the capital markets and otherwise into the projects of the fund. So this is sort of the historical progression going from grants to foundation-based venture to collective investment schemes like a fund. Now, you asked another excellent question. Well, why the ADGM? Why Abu Dhabi? In truth, there are many wonderful jurisdictions for funds, without a doubt. But what you'll find is that, in particular, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, they've been very aggressive and avant-garde in adopting regulatory frameworks that support virtual assets, right? And then the second thing is, and really, I have to hand it to these particular jurisdictions, they have been so intelligent and proactive about their desire to diversify from an exclusive reliance on oil. They are leading the charge in digital assets, in AI, in data centers, in deep tech. Their leadership, to me, are modeling what true financial vision is in terms of technological adoption. They've made it easy to attract these best in breed technologies by making it easy to invest in them. So it goes without saying, we're blessed with having our headquarters here in Pfäffikon near Zurich, but as part of a globalization effort, why not take advantage of those jurisdictions that are welcoming to virtual assets and are also welcoming to investors? And this is what was done.
Yeah, they're really going for it, are they? They've kind of put all that on the table and said, we want it.
Yeah, and in fairness, it's not just Abu Dhabi. I mean, you know, we have a deep tech venture studio out of Saudi Arabia has been incredible along this journey. Then there's Qatar. Qatar is probably one of my favorite destinations in the world. I mean, it is such a fantastic destination. It's great to visit, incredibly classy, but their Qatar Financial Center, QFC, they're all about digital assets and supporting the creation of legislation and an environment that is great for startups, great for technology companies, great for digital asset companies. So when you see this, you feel embraced. You almost feel like you should be there. Everybody else is there. The government is so open and welcoming, and they're great places to be.
Yeah, man. Thinking about the progression from grants through to venture, one of the benefits maybe of the grant system is if your ecosystem needs a wallet and you don't have one, it might not be particularly profitable, but you can give a grant that helps the ecosystem. Or if you want to build DeFi, you can help DeFi builders who might, again, not necessarily individually be particularly profitable, but they will help the whole ecosystem be profitable. How are you thinking about that when it comes to the venture fund? Are you looking across the ecosystem, or are you more looking at each individual, like a normal venture studio might, or a venture capital firm might?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thanks for that. Let me give you a sense of what the investment thesis is. At a high level, what we look at is Web3 infra. right? So that's where things like wallet custodian services, trading systems, that sort of thing comes in. But what we want to do is always make sure that we're giving to projects that will be sustainable. And the truth is, the only businesses that tend to be sustainable are those businesses that have some sort of commercial model. And this comes to the second point about having commercial traction, right? Because the worst thing that you can do is have a system where you pick winners and losers based on who you give money to, irrespective of the fact that that particular project would not be sustainable unless you are deciding to pick the winners and losers, right? So that's the other side of pure grant systems. It's sort of unfair because if you're not innovating and bringing on additional customers and finding a way to be sustainable, then whatever money you put into that particular project may fail unless you continue to put money into it, which by definition doesn't really help the ecosystem. You're sort of juiced.
Doesn't incentivize them either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So what we do though, is we know that a certain degree of what we like to invest in has to be infrastructure supporting. And then it's amazing. Whenever you set these criteria, you get the best projects that scrimp and pinch, find ways to monetize. And you feel confident that, yeah, if I give this company, if I make an investment in this company, after 1 or 2 years, they'll still be here, even if we're not reinvesting, right?
Yes.
And that is always a possibility because you don't know if you will have access to those resources in 5 years to continue reinvesting. Now, the other third of our investment thesis tends to be in the fintech space. So we constitute fintech pretty much anything to do with finance, money, and transactions. But statistically, if you look at those elements that have been incredibly successful on the internet and particularly in the Web3 space, it does tend to be tied to the finance space. I mean, I think the best use case, which we almost take for granted now, are stablecoins. Stablecoins are the killer app of Web3. The last third, in terms of what we like to look at, tends to revolve around software as a service or applications that bill on the basis of a transaction fee. When I say a transaction fee, I'm not talking about a gas fee, but it's sort of like something that's volume-based. Per every time you do something, this is the fee that you're going to pay. And we find those systems tend to work because they tend to increase in adoption with the increase in the markets that they're in, right? So if we look at the investment process through that lens of three, you're looking at Web3 infrastructure, fintech, and then SaaS and transaction fee-based systems, you'll find that there's actually a lot of different applications from entertainment to academic that can fit within that. But it helps guide our philosophy of investment. So we're being good stewards of ecosystem funds.
Yeah, man, that's really cool. We do have quite a number of builders who watch or listen to the show.
Yeah.
They're hearing you now and thinking, man, I should have a look at Hedera right now. Are there any particular verticals or projects or applications that you're keen to see that would help build out the ecosystem? Obviously, commercially viable. We're assuming that. But are there any particular kinds of things that you're hoping to see?
I think I'm a big fan of any projects that bring investments on chain, DeFi protocols like borrowing, lending, those sorts of financial toolings. Very, very valuable, very, very interesting. We think any projects that make it easier for large enterprises to start building on Hedera. So that can range from tooling, tool sets, toolkits. I think it is not a particular area of my focus, but a lot of sports and records tracking is very, very useful. And it actually has a lot of value in terms of the data that can be recorded. One of our most famous Hedera ecosystem projects is karate combat. And it's sort of like a mixed martial arts. Actually, it's not mixed martial arts. It's pure striking. But they have sort of like this pit instead of an octagon. And the wallet system for those tokens was built by a Hedera ecosystem stalwart company called Blade Labs. And that's a wallet project. And it's actually one that we've invested in. But it's transparent to this sports league. And they used it for match selection and other activities. They have embedded tokens throughout that. Another big area that we look at is there are great companies that do third-party logistics and shipping. There's one that has been on the H-Bar Bowl QuickPick, which is a project that I know and love personally, and they track transactions on chain. Then there are traceability projects we've invested in, like Agnext, like Shamba Records. These are companies. Agnext is based out of India. A larger company does food product traceability. Shamba Records does traceability, bringing farmers on chain in Kenya, and they have access to millions of farmers, and they basically make it possible for these farmers to bring their goods to market. There's a great company, in Nigeria called Ivory Pay, which they do millions in transactions, and they're basically an on-ramp taking crypto to fiat to crypto for business and individuals. So I think that you really, the sky's the limit. And I think that's a great thing about being this early in the game. We think that Web3, it's been around a while, but it's really very early in its journey. So yeah, please just come up with your ideas, try them out, and come have a chat with us.
Andrew, last question for today. I'm wondering, do you have any particularly contrarian views where most people seem to be thinking one way or looking one way, but you're kind of more interested in the opposite or the minority report? Anything we can learn from you in terms of, how you're thinking differently to most people?
Yeah, I think it's no secret within the ecosystem, within my office here and to our portfolio companies, that I'm very comfortable with companies making money. I think grants and free money, honestly, I think it kills innovation. And this probably, maybe this is one of those things that will end up being cut from the podcast. Who knows? But I think there's a degree of efficiency that comes with the understanding that, if you get an investment, you give something up because then you value the investment. I also think that in Web3, so many people jump into an investment and the immediate reaction is to have, they jump into a project and the immediate reaction is to have some outlandish valuation. I think it's dumb. Like, I think people should focus on actually building a product and getting customers. And then they'll say something like, in Web3, that's really hard. Okay, good. It's hard. If you can't do it, then you don't have a business, right? But if you are successful, you'll probably do very, very well. Like, there are some very powerful big companies that have tokenized bonds, created marketplaces, and these started effectively from scratch. But if you don't have any customers, then why do you think you are deserving of $100 million valuation? This makes no sense. So maybe I've gotten jaded, but I'm always a big fan of those companies that they bootstrap, they get customers, they make revenue, then they say, look, if you want to work together, we can, but let's have a fair negotiation. You know that CEO values his company's equity and also is really keenly aware of the importance of building a system that solves people's problems or some business's problem. And all too often in the Web3 space, The Web3 enthusiasts build things just because they think it's cool. They're building it for themselves, but they're asking you to pay for it. So I obviously, I don't agree with that approach.
I hope that's a growing perspective in the Web3 ecosystem.
Well, I can tell you that it has not necessarily made me the most popular person, but I think the logic is unimpeachable. So I just think that's particularly if, in my role, you're effectively a steward of ecosystem funds, somebody else's money. So I would rather have people hate me for trying to make conservative decisions and ensure that projects will last for a long time into the perpetuity because they have a sustainable business model, than be really popular and have a lot of friends because I've recommended investing in projects that have no hope of any sustainability. I mean, that's just not right. That's not what we're here to do.
Yeah, man. Andrew, I've really enjoyed chatting with you today. I would love to pick your brains more about your investment thesis as well, maybe next time. If people want to find or hear more from you or find out more about what you're building, where can they find you online?
Oh, man. Well, we have a website at hashgraph.swiss. So I think that's the best place to go, hashgraph.swiss. I'm certainly reachable on LinkedIn, Andrew Forson. I think it's LinkedIn/in/PA Forson. They can reach out to me via email, andrew.forson@hashgraph-group.com. And there's also our website, which is hashgraph-group.com. So there's a range of modalities to reach out. But for me in particular, LinkedIn is great. And I think you'll do well with hashgraph.swiss.
Good on you. We'll chuck all those in the show notes. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Look, I really appreciate this. And thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Off-Chain. We love bringing you great guests like Andrew and hope we've inspired you to learn more about technology, about Web3, about the future, and how you can be a part of building it. As always, please like, subscribe, or better yet, share this episode with a friend and help us spread the word. And join us again next week for another exciting episode of Off-Chain. Till then, take care.